Welcome to Mentoring in Real Life, where we talk about what it takes to find and be a great mentor. I'm Angela, and together with my co-host Bill, we know the power of mentoring and what it can do in your life on both sides of the table. If you're interested in learning tips, tricks, and hearing stories about mentoring, you're in the right place. Come join us. Hey, Bill.
Hey, Angela.
How you doing today?
Never been this happy.
Never been this happy. I love it. Well, today, Bill, our topic is all meant for the mentors. We want to ask the mentors and help provide information to mentors on how do you pick your mentees? What steps do you make sure that you're prepared to engage in a mentoring conversation? You know, one of the reasons we wanted to have this topic is at times there are some obstacles to being a mentor. So some of our colleagues that we've talked about find that being a mentor, they choose not to do so, perhaps because they feel like it is going to take too much time, or they believe it's the mentor's responsibility to create the mentee's successful career, or even they might have imposter syndrome, like, what do I have to offer? So we want to dispel some of those ideas and talk about what it really means to be a mentor and how to find the right mentee.
Yeah, I think we got to get past those kinds of thoughts in people's minds. If you're a senior leader in an organization, you do have a responsibility to help build the next generation of talent. And if you're not, I would submit with due respect to all those senior leaders out there that you're missing part of your responsibility. It's just that important for the senior leaders to be driving that behavior. And so, we should have an initial call to action that says, for us, if you're a senior leader or even a mid-grade leader or manager, you should be thinking about whether or not you're building that next generation of talent for your company and even for your industry. In this day and age, people don't stay in the same company forever, but they often go out, work for somebody else, and end up coming back. When you're building leaders and you say you're building it for the industry, largely you may be building it for your own company as well as the rest of the industry. I would say that the follow-up to thinking about that is then reaching out to the people that you see as the future leaders and making sure that you're trying to figure out who are those folks and go find them and go approach them. I just think it's absolutely critical for potential mentors to be thinking those thoughts as they go through their careers.
Mm-hmm. And so if it's important for a senior leader to recognize that a big role is to help grow the future leaders in their company or industry. And let's say a senior leader has no mentees. You're asking them, find some. You're asking them to go into your company, go into your industry, find some of the high potential folks that you see and let them know that you're open to mentoring them if they're interested in hearing and partnering with you in that manner.
Yeah, I totally agree with that thought. It's critical and again, part of your responsibility. Sometimes the people that you see as future leaders may be uncomfortable reaching out to senior people like you. So if you see those people with that kind of potential, then I would say take it upon yourself to go reach out to them. Find a reason to be in a meeting at some point where after the meeting's broken up, you can just approach them and say, hey, listen, I think you have a lot of potential. I see you doing great work, and I'd like to see you continue on that path. And if you'd like to talk about what your future might hold, I'd be glad to put some time aside.
Mm-hmm. So what about those senior leaders? They may already have some mentees under their belt, or maybe they don't. And they've been approached by somebody who is a potential mentee. They've had somebody ask them to be their mentor. What's the first step?
So if you already have a bunch of mentees and you say, I just don't have the time, but you still see potential in that person, let's start off presuming that you do know something about this person and their potential for growth. If you don't have the time yourself, you may want to say, I'm going to sit down with you for a few minutes. I don't have the time myself, but I think you have lots of potential. And let's talk about other folks that you could reach out to and the other places you should go that would fit with where you want to go in the organization. So that's if you know them. If you don't know them, you still might want to take the time to chat with them and see about where they're trying to go. And you might be able to offer them places to look for potential mentors and have a conversation about what their approach to finding mentors might be, particularly if what they've started out by doing is reaching out to people that they don't know or that don't know them. And so you could help them in that way without committing to a long-term mentoring relationship.
And what if you think this is a mentee I might want to say yes to? How do you discern when to say yes?
I may be an aberration. I said yes much more than I said no. And I'm sure there are folks out there who would say it should be the other way around. Um, my approach to that is I don't know exactly what their potential is, but I'm willing to find out because they were motivated enough to approach a senior leader and try and figure out if they could get time from that person in the world of mentoring. And so I think it's critical if you're, as you're making that decision, for you to make an assessment as to whether or not that person appears to have the potential that you would like to have for the future in your industry or your company.
So the Talent Management Institute defines high potential employees as essentially having three fundamentals. The first of that is raw materials. So intellect, character, ability to relate, motivation to achieve and to lead. The Talent Management Institute, when they're talking about raw materials, are talking about things you can't necessarily change. You can't train attitude in a person. You might be able to smooth out some rough edges, but sometimes there's edges that just are there to stay. And when that happens, giving feedback is imperative. The second piece that the Talent Management Institute talks about is experience. So a high potential person would want to have a variety of experiences, intensity of experiences, adversity in experiences, and diversity of experiences. And when a person has all four of those types of experiences, that helps round them out and prepare them for more senior leadership positions in a company. The third piece is the ability and willingness to learn from experience. How good is the individual at taking feedback? And it's important when you take feedback to say thank you for the feedback because all feedback is a gift.
Even if it doesn't feel that way at the time.
Even if it doesn't feel that way at a time. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so that's an interesting point, and it fits right in with the you talked earlier about smoothing out edges, a mentor trying to help a mentee smooth out edges. And you said some edges appear to be there to stay. It becomes imperative to have a conversation about when an edge that somebody has stays, it's a choice they're making, right? They could choose to behave differently. They could choose to express themselves differently. And so being willing to take the feedback, like you just described, and apply it as you see fit as a mentee. Obviously, it's going to be your choice how you apply it. But those rough edges, if your mentor is saying, look, you have some rough edges that don't really fit well with other folks, you might want to say, I don't need to be so right that nobody wants to talk to me. I think that your comment about feedback being a gift, even when it doesn't feel like it, when somebody says, you're doing stuff that actually it's offensive to other people, even though that's not your intention, the fact that you didn't intend it doesn't make it okay. I think your comment about being willing to take feedback is a driving force for whether or not somebody is going to be a productive mentee or not.
Intent does not always equal result.
Intent doesn't equal result, and transmission doesn't equal reception.
Mm-hmm.
Well, actually, in a conversation, that's probably the only part that matters, how each of the participants receives the other person's comments.
Mm-hmm.
So just a real important point about being willing to take feedback and
Yeah.
finding mentees who are, in fact, willing to take feedback.
Yes, absolutely. As the mentor, you are looking for, is this person, do they have a future as a leader in your company or your industry? Are they a high potential employee or do they have the potential to be a high potential employee as defined by having the raw materials, having the aptitude to grow in their experiences, and then having the ability and willingness to learn from experience and take feedback? What are some other elements that you would recommend mentors say yes to these potential employees?
Yeah, so maybe you know them really well. You don't have to think these thoughts explicitly, but if you don't know them really well, after your first meeting, do you resonate with the professional values and priorities that they've expressed in the meeting? I think that actually is driving factor for whether or not the two of you are going to be a good match. If they if they have a completely different focus and a different set of priorities for life and for work than you do, for at least for me, it would be an indicator that perhaps I'm not the best mentor that they could have, particularly if they are committed to that set of priorities. And so being committed to the relationship is a fundamental piece. But if we really don't match up well with what we think is important in life and what's important at work, it's going to be a struggle to get to common ground, in my opinion, for whether or not this is going to be a productive mentoring relationship or not. I could try to impose what I think is important, but if that doesn't resonate for them, that's not a that's not a winning combination. So to me, and this is not a discussion about religious values. It's a discussion about more generalized values in life and profession. I'm not trying to get sideways on trying to, everybody has to think the same way. But if somebody came to me and said, money is the only thing that matters to me, and I don't care about mission, I don't care about delivering stuff to customers, I just care about making more money, I'm probably not the best mentor they could have because I'm not being naive and I'm not trying to be foolish about this. Of course, everybody cares about making a good wage and supporting their family and doing all those things. But if I care about that to the exclusion of everything else in my life, then I'm not your best mentor because that doesn't resonate with me at all. I'm much more of the Simon Sinek view of life, finding your why and finding what's important to you. And so in the relationship, finding what's important to the mentee. And if it doesn't have to be matched to exactly to me, but if it's way off in left field for what I think is important, I'm going to probably recommend a different mentor for that person.
Hmm. I'm thinking about what might be some other examples of when there might be a mismatch, and specifically a mismatch in values as they come up in the workplace. You mentioned money as being one, when somebody is just purely financially driven without consideration for the mission of the company, the customers that you're serving, and so forth. What might be some other examples of values where there might be a misalignment?
Sure. And I didn't see it often, but occasionally there certainly appear to be people out there who don't care about the trail of dead bodies that they leave behind them on the way to the top. Again, that's not a good match for me. If that's the kind of person you are as a mentor and you find somebody just like that, maybe you're a great match, but you wouldn't be a good match for me. If you can't think win-win, you only think win-lose. So if I win something, I've got to be making somebody else lose something on the way up to the top. That doesn't fit for my set of values. And so I'm passing no judgment really on that other than it doesn't work for me. And so that would be a huge mismatch for me if I sense that that's the way the mentee approached life. The other part is if in their drive to make money for the company or make progress for the company, they don't mind. Well, I'm sorry, I have to make it attached to our specific domain that we both worked in, and this is the taxpayers were paying for our work. And so, if somebody had an idea that they knew would cost the taxpayers more money, but would make more money for their project, that doesn't resonate for me either. If I think we're wasting people's money, and so you could easily translate that to almost any customer. If I think I'm wasting their money, as opposed to giving them much, much greater value, having them want to invest more money because of the great value I'm giving them, okay, that's very motivational to me. If I'd think, well, if I just hide that from them and I can make more money for the company, but I'm screwing the customer, that would not resonate for me. Those values don't match up for me at all. And so those obviously are things that are personal to me. And so what I'm saying for the mentors is that the values that you have ought to try and find some match for the values that they have for themselves, because that's going to make your relationship very easy to build upon because you guys have shared sets of values.
Mm.
And so those are a couple of examples of things that just don't work for me. But I certainly have experienced that with people who, in fact, were potential mentors, and I could see that their behavior did not match the way I want to behave in my professional life. And so I never chased them as a mentor. And
Mhm.
so it works in both directions is all.
That's so true. That's so true. Another aspect when you're a mentor looking at this potential mentee and whether or not to say yes to the mentee is whether or not they seem to be committed to the mentoring relationship. It takes work. It's not a one and done discussion. It's not sitting in front of your mentor and the mentor just takes their entire brain's worth of wisdom and shares it with the mentee right there. But it takes work to have a really good mentee relationship. What do you see as noticing whether or not the commitment is there?
Yeah, I think it comes quickly. First off, the mentee really is the one who has the responsibility for the relationship with the mentor. And so driving the agendas and driving what's going to be, what they're going to talk about and proposing how they want to accomplish the ideas that the mentor is offering. I think those, if you see a person demonstrating that they're putting that thought into the relationship before they walk in the room, if they take good notes, if they come to you and say, here's the 30 things that I wanted to go over today, and here's what I want to talk about for growing my career around here. Okay, they really are putting thought in it outside the 1 hour that I'm giving them each month. But if they show up and say, I don't know, what do you feel like talking about today? Okay, I'm not feeling the commitment at that point, and I'm going to probably give them feedback that says, this relationship is yours to build. I mean, I'm here to help you, but I can't decide what's best for you. You're going to have to drive that piece. And so it's, to me, it always was fairly obvious whether somebody was committed to it or not, because you could tell inside the first couple of minutes of each meeting that they've leaned into it and they're planning and they have ideas about that they want to discuss. Or they come in and say, so what do we talk about today?
Yeah,
At which point they're headed for some feedback.
they're having, yeah, and feedback is a
The
gift.
gift of feedback that I will
That
be
gift.
glad to give them.
Yeah. I love giving gifts. And so the mentee's responsibility is to really be prepared for the conversation. How does the mentor need to prepare?
Well, so I think that the mentor's job, first off, is to make sure they come to an agreement with the mentee early in the relationship about how much time they're going to be willing to devote to that relationship. Generally speaking, I'd say it's 1 to 2 hours a month minimum. That's something that the cadence for that folks can work out amongst themselves between mentor and mentee. And I would suggest that they set that cadence, okay, we're going to try this for 6 months and see how that's working. And so a critical piece of that, the more senior you get, the more chances are there are people who control your calendar as opposed to you controlling your calendar. And so an important piece for the mentor is to make sure the mentee knows the exact right way to get on the calendar and make sure that planning gets done well in advance and that there's time for the mentor to plan around those meetings as much as possible. And that means getting them on the calendar early and making the commitment to do that. It's just critical to recognize that if you have a relatively junior person, they're not driving the show. They're trying to get through whoever your gatekeepers are for your time and your calendar. And so that's going to be on you to drive that behavior with the people who are keeping the calendar and make sure they know when Angela schedules time, I've told her I want her scheduled out a month or two in advance, get it on the calendar, because she's my mentee. I'm going to be making the time for that. So make sure that gets in there and make sure that that's not something that some fight the mentee's having to have getting on your calendar.
Mhm.
Uh, and then, along the same things that we were just talking about, you want to set the expectations with the mentee, not just getting on the calendar, but hey, you're going to be setting the agenda for this relationship.
You're asking the mentor to make sure that they have 1 to 2 hours a month available for the mentee as a minimum. And you recommend this relationship, this mentoring relationship, last roughly about 6 months. That's what I heard you say earlier. What happens then?
Oh, okay. Sorry. So at the 6 month point, I would say it's time to evaluate whether the path that you think you're on with the mentee and figure out if it's working for both of you. So that you'll have had by that time 6 meetings ostensibly that tell you whether or not you are a good match, whether or not the mentee is committed to the relationship, and whether or not you have a good set of matching values and you think that you're on a path to success for the two of you. So it's not a 6 month relationship. I'm just suggesting at 6 months, it's time to evaluate whether it's going to be positive and you want to continue, or you're going to recommend perhaps that they find somebody else.
So then you renegotiate at that point at 6 months. Yeah. And we're not saying to end it at that point. We're saying if it's still working, it's working. Or if it's not working, you either identify why it's not for both parties and how to fix it, or if it's something that can't be fixed, then perhaps you wish that mentee well and move on.
Move on and perhaps offer, even now that you know them, you might think, there's a number of other people who might be better choices for them. And you could offer those names up. You could, if you choose, you could offer to make introductions for those people and get them started with somebody else. So it's not, this didn't work out and you dump them into the street. It's, this didn't work out and here's some alternatives that might work out better for you.
Mhm. And so it's incumbent on the mentee to make sure that they get on your calendar, and you have worked with your admin assistant, should you have one, to make sure that that person will help him or her get on your calendar for the requisite time on a monthly basis, and have some set ahead as well that are on both of your calendars that can hopefully remain on your calendars or be renegotiated if other priorities come into pass. You have then looked at the recurring meetings and plans for the next 6 months. You've described to your mentee how they get on your calendar. What about expectations? How do you set expectations for your mentee?
It's the mentee has to own the process. It's not on the mentor to drive the behaviors that go on in the meetings. It's up to the mentee to, they're the ones who have to work to get on the calendar. They're the ones who should be setting the agenda for the conversation, and so it's critical for them to drive that set of behaviors. So that's also a demonstration of their commitment to the relationship. And I think will tell very, very quickly whether or not they're all in or not. And so for the mentee, those are the driving factors, I think.
Yeah. What else does a mentor do?
Well, so, I mean, the mentor's coming to that person with ideas about what's going to help them in their career. So, among other things, that would be, so what training do I think you should be getting? And what books should you be following? And what are the sort of the universal ideas that are critical to your future leadership that you should be getting experience and training on, whether that's reading about it or taking classes and so forth. And so I think it's really important for the mentor to be sharing some of that. There's just a whole bunch of things that over a career you've been exposed to in training that new folks haven't seen yet, may not have heard of yet. And an example that I think of all the time, because it is such an important part of my professional and personal life, as it turns out, is the training I got in the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. But somebody fresh out of college may never have heard of that. So, I mean, that's not new training. That's been around for a long time. But if you're fresh out of college and you haven't had that exposure to that, presuming that you as a mentor find that training or some other training as fundamental to your success, that's the kind of stuff you need to be sharing with the mentee and making sure they're aware of those opportunities and are chasing them, because there's just a lot of stuff out there that you may know about that people with much less experience and much less time in life just haven't been exposed to. And it's important for you to help them see those opportunities.
And so knowing your own tools and tricks that have been helpful for you would be helpful in a mentoring conversation, in a mentoring engagement.
That as a training has helped define who I am as a person for a long time. And so it isn't just my position. I presume if somebody's chasing me as a mentor, it's because they something resonated with the way that I choose to be as a leader in the organization. And that training was a fundamental part of who I've chosen to be. So why wouldn't I share that with the mentee
Mhm.
as a great way to help them develop their own leadership skills?
Well, I know that you're an ambassador to the 7 habits. I mean, they don't know you're an ambassador, but I know you're an ambassador to the 7 habits of highly effective people. And some of those habits help with setting up a good mentoring conversation. How would you recommend a mentor set themselves up for a good mentoring discussion?
Yeah. So I'm glad you brought back the 7 habits, because habit number 5 is seek first to understand and then to be understood. And so in any mentoring relationship, as far as I'm concerned, the first thing that the mentor has to be good at and has to work on very clearly is listening. If it's location, location, location in real estate, in mentoring, it's listen, listen, listen. And I'll even invoke some Ted Lasso wisdom, be curious, not judgmental. So when you're listening, you're not listening to say, oh, they got that right or they got that wrong. You're listening to understand how they approach life and what's important to them without judging whether or not that's the way you would do it. There's plenty of time for you to make recommendations in the future, but in the earliest parts of any mentoring relationship, it's about listening and understanding what drives that person, what their priorities are, what they want out of their professional life, what they want out of their personal life, if that is appropriate to the conversation. And so, yeah, the listening piece is just fundamental to that. And so, following the second half of habit 5 there, it's seeking to be understood. I think you need to be prepared to share stories of your own career, things that you've learned, lessons that you've had to either learn the hard way or somebody that shared with you and you were fortunate enough to learn the easy way. And I would say most people would say those are professional stories you'd share, but I have shared personal stories as well. At some limited amount that were appropriate for showing why I thought those values were important to the way that I treated other people, whether they were at work or in my personal life. And so I think the listening first and sharing second, I think those are just fundamental to the discussion. Mentoring isn't just giving somebody a checklist. Well, go do these 5 things and you'll be successful like I was. I don't think that's the path.
Mhm.
And so sharing stories is a huge part of that.
Yeah. And one way as a mentor to make sure that you're ready to listen and that you're ready to share stories is ensuring that you're also present in the conversation. And one recommendation, one call to action that we have to mentors is get out from behind your desk for these conversations. Let go of those things that could easily be distractions. If your monitor is within your peripheral vision, you'll see if an email or a chat or something pops up on your monitor. You'll notice it. Same thing with your phone. If you've got it right next to you, you can feel the vibration of it when a notification happens or a phone call happens. Get away from the distractions, whether that be at a desk inside your office or even more beneficial is to get out of the office. What are some recommendations that you might have for a mentor to set up a successful conversation with a mentee, whether in the office or outside of it?
Sure. So, I mean, you hit the most important pieces first, which is get the distractions away from you. And so getting out from behind your desk and sitting at a table with them where the only thing in front of you might be a notebook so you can take notes on the conversation and your phone is back on the desk and the computer monitor is behind you and you just are present for that person. If you're going to take the time to be a mentor, then take the time to be present with that person. In that hour, they are your priority and everything else is just going to be second, short of, the sky is falling, the building's burning down or something, or some family crisis. They're the reason for your being at that moment. So, first off, it's the right thing to do because you're trying to help them. And the only way you can actually listen is to be undistracted by the other things going on in your life. And second, the message you're sending to them is that they're the most important thing for you at that moment, which they should be. That's what this should be about. If you're going to spend the time mentoring somebody, make sure they know that you're all in too. It's not, we talked about it, how the mentee owns the relationship. That has nothing to do with the mentor saying, okay, well, I don't have to really be committed to this.
Well, then it's not a relationship.
Good call. Good call. So the mentor has to be just as committed to the conversation as the mentee is. And you show commitment by putting down distractions and listening and being present with that person. But you talked about should we be doing it in the office or not in the office? You certainly can have those conversations in the office. And certainly the earliest ones probably are appropriate in the office. But I did find that it was very, very productive to find someplace away from my office or their office to have those conversations. Now that could be a lunchroom. It could be lunch at a restaurant. It could be someplace where if you choose and it's appropriate, you could be sharing, the beverage of choice to have a healthy conversation that is not bound by the restrictions that come with sitting in the office and things that you would or would not feel comfortable talking about. And so I'm not saying you have to be out for a drink with somebody. I'm saying that you find places where you are released from the bonds of being bound by the workplace so that you can have a real heart-to-heart conversation about what's important to people. And so I think there's great value in that. And as it turns out, since I said I was probably the aberration because I often said yes more than I said no to mentees, uh, so if somebody got to me earlier, I might have time on my calendar, okay, we can do lunch together once a month, and that's during the workday. But if other folks wanted to get on my calendar, it meant getting on my calendar after working hours. I certainly started a number of mentee conversations after 5 o'clock because that's when my admin assistant wasn't around anymore and they could get past the gatekeeper. And I was happy to do that. And that often was right there in my office, but everybody else was gone. So we could have a conversation that didn't have the next meeting right afterwards and all the things that get in the way of having an unfettered conversation.
I'm not sure you and I started any of our mentoring conversations before, well, certainly 4:30.
That's probably a true statement. But if it's during the workday, and certainly for a senior leader, my workdays were very, very filled up with meetings and conferences and all sorts of things that went on. And so I didn't have the time to actually be present often during the workday. But at 5 o'clock, I could be present because I didn't have an admin assistant saying, "Hey, your next appointment's here," or "Hey, you got to get this email out," or "Hey, there's somebody waiting in the outer office." And after 5 o'clock, my time really was my time.
Mhm.
And so that's why I defaulted to trying to do it after working hours when I could be 100% present for the person I was trying to mentor.
Yeah. I also found that meeting early, I'm saying 6:30 in the
Yes,
morning for coffee, that on, coffee shop on the way to work, that also,
agreed.
yeah, was very
Again,
helpful.
it's before my admin assistant and gatekeeper said, "You have the next meeting," because I wasn't at work yet. So we'd meet for coffee. And yeah, that too works. I just found that when I was the executive director, I just didn't have the time in the workday where I could totally feel like I was all in on the conversation because there was always somebody waiting for the next meeting and so forth. So I'm not telling people that they have to do it outside the actual working hours. I know that's what worked best for me and might work best for many senior people who have very, very full calendars during the working hours.
So we've talked about the importance of a mentor. First of all, being present for the conversation. Secondly, being prepared to share stories of successes, of failures in their own careers or their lives, whatever's appropriate for the conversation. And I can't help but think that all of that helps to drive mutual trust between the mentor and the mentee. And when you have that mutual trust, the mentee's professional development, in my opinion, goes much faster than without it. When there's no concerns about a hidden agenda on either side, either the mentor is concerned that the mentee has a hidden agenda or vice versa. It also helps, from my experience, the mentee maybe take some risks if they know that you as the mentor have their back. What is an example that you might remember about that kind of experience where either you had a mentee's back and you saw them take more risks, or that helped drive mutual trust, and how that impacted the mentee's professional development?
Sure. So as far as first off, I completely agree with your statement. If you want those relationships to grow, mutual trust is sort of fundamental to that growth. And so what I found in driving that trust is often being okay with presuming I've gotten to the place where I have some basic trust in the mentee. I'm going to show some vulnerability. I'm going to tell stories of my own stupidity or my big missteps in my career because I think that makes you much more human as the mentor. Oh, they're the big boss, so they've never made any mistakes. Are you kidding me? They've all made mistakes. I guess I shouldn't speak for all the rest of them. I've made plenty of mistakes. And so it's not like there's any threat with me saying I did this foolish thing and I learned from it and here's how it worked out better for me. I mean, what it turns out is I'm not handing anybody a weapon to use against me. When I shared stories, it wasn't like some big secret story. One of my favorite stories to share with people who were trying to grow in their careers was to talk about the first time that I interviewed to be one of the senior leaders at our center. And I went into that interview and I acted like somebody else. I tried to tell answers to the questions based on what I thought the panel wanted to hear, as opposed to, well, this is how I would do that. Bill would do it this way. And so I just tell them what I would do. And then if they don't like that, then I wasn't a good match for the position anyway. And so I talked to one of my mentors who happened to be on the panel, and I said, "Oh my gosh, that First one was just awful. He said, it wasn't bad, but I just kept waiting for you to show up, Bill. It's like, it wasn't you in the meeting. I don't know who I was talking to. And so I was happy, it wasn't some big secret. He already knew that I had screwed that up. And so when I share that with a mentee, there's no threat to me. What are you going to say? You had a bad first interview? Yeah, I know. I just told you I had a bad first interview. There's no threat there, but it shares, I think sharing missteps along the path that I had shows that, we're all human and it's okay. And I think that opens the door for people to share the things that they have struggled with. And I found that to be true. And so how did that manifest itself in an example where somebody was willing to try something they might not have otherwise tried? I had this young mentee who was trying to build a coaching program. You might know her, who was trying to build a coaching program at our organization. And was trying something that the organization had not done before. And she knew, because we had a mentor-mentee relationship, that I wasn't going to leave her hanging when she's briefing this thing in front of a large senior audience. And I think she took some risks that paid off quite nicely for the program that still exists at our organization. And she was the founding person for that organization effort to build a robust coaching capability for our organization that was really phenomenally successful. But I don't know if she would have ever proposed that if she thought, well, I'm going to go in there. Nobody knows who I am. Nobody has any reason to respect my idea because they don't know me, as opposed to coming in and saying, well, there's at least one person in the room who knows me and has developed some mutual respect for me. And so I can try something. So you might want to comment. I think you know that person.
I do. I see that person every morning in the mirror.
Yeah.
And that's an excellent example. I knew that I had actually talked to you about coaching before going in and giving the briefing, and got some advice from you on how to brief it and what to make sure I covered and whatnot. And I knew you had my back. I knew that you weren't going to leave me out hanging at all. I did take a huge risk because it was a brand new program that we had never done before at the center. And here I was asking to grow it. I was asking for money for it. I was asking to build it from scratch. And it took a lot of advocating from folks like you, and a good strategy that I had to put together and convey to get it going and to build it from scratch. And it is still there today, and bigger and better than ever, which is just a huge, wonderful legacy to have left.
It's phenomenal. And so, I mean, there's sort of an obvious benefit of that mentoring relationship is that if you had ideas that you wanted to try out, okay, now you have a mentor who's part of the organization that you don't work for directly, but you can have those kind of conversations about, hey, I want to go after this and I want to go get money and I have this idea and, what do you think? And it's a pretty safe, now that you have an established relationship, you have a very safe place to go over those ideas and those aspirations for your career. So invariably, that kind of relationship is just going to be positive for the mentee because they're going to be willing to try something that they hadn't thought possible perhaps before.
It certainly is. So wrapping up our discussion today, being a mentor is a significant role in your leadership journey, and incumbent on you to help build out the next generation of leaders or technical subject matter experts in your company or in your industry. We invite you to seek out high potential employees in your industry or your company and let them know you're following them and offer to assist if they want it. If you're approached by a potential mentee, Bill, what are some of the key points that we made today?
Yeah. So, I mean, if you're approached, number one is, do you know them and think they have strong potential? If you do, okay, let's start to set up the boundaries for how we want that relationship to progress. If you don't have the time, okay, well then at least be willing to be there for them to say, so let's have a conversation about people that might be still available for you. If I don't have the time, maybe there are others who would be great mentors for you. And if you know them well enough, perhaps you can even set up introductions to those potential mentors. As you're continuing down the relationship with somebody you choose to mentor, okay, so let's start off that relationship with listening and trying to understand the mentee's background, their goals, and being open to how they want to approach this, and set yourself up for being with them and being present with them. Get out from behind your desk, get rid of the distractions, and be present for the conversation. As that progresses, you want to take the time to consider what stories from your career will shed light and provide insight for those folks that, if they think it's appropriate, then be willing to share that with them. Be willing to be a little bit vulnerable with them and show that, you're human just like they are. And you're interested in making sure that they don't have to make all the same mistakes you did. And finally, I would say, when you're talking about helping somebody build a career, it's pretty tough to talk about it and not at least have some knowledge of what the rest of their life looks like. How you would mentor somebody might change or might vary if they're currently single and don't have kids, or they're married and have 3 kids young kids at home. Your mentoring for that person may or may not change, and you wouldn't even know that if you don't take the time to understand what's going on in the rest of their life, not just who they are at work. And so that just is going to help you give a very healthy perspective for what you think is important for their career now and for the future.
Thank you for that summary. And thank you all for listening to this episode of Mentoring in Real Life. If you have thoughts or questions, feel free to leave us a comment. If you liked what you heard, please subscribe, rate the podcast, and share with a friend. Until next time, help others climb.